Hello everyone, we are Mariona
Aina,
Sergi,
and Aleix.
and welcome to our Feudal Organization tutorial.
This is the Feudal Organization in 5 minutes.
First of all, we're going to start with the feudal society.
After the disappearance of the Carolingian Empire, all Europe was divided into numerous kingdoms. But the kings hadn't enough power to protect their possessions, that were land, money, various possessions, army, and etc. As the peasants were not sure that the king would protect them, they resorted to the nobles' protection, because they had their own army and castle to take refuge in case the population, in this case the peasants, was attacked. In exchange for this protection, the peasants worked at the complete disposition of the nobles. In other words, they fully submitted to their authority. In this way, the peasants became kind of the nobles' slaves. And this is how this social system came to be.
feudalism ended up adopting the following characteristics.
The nobles had absolute dominion over their lands. They did not depend on the king to control them. Therefore, the king could only directly control the lands that were exclusively his. This was because of the king's lack of power.
As we have already said, the king's power was very weak. So the court, organized by nobles, helped the king to govern. It consisted of a group of jurists, warriors, and the clergy. That was basically the church. In the feudal epoch, almost all the people believed in God, so the clergy acquired a quite strong dominion on the government.
If there was an outsider, the king called his vassals to unite the armies and cooperate to beat the enemy. The king's income came from his lands and some cities, and if didn't get enough money, he received financial help from their great vassals and the church.
The nobles could become the king's vassals, in a ceremony where the vassals swore allegiance, military aid, and advice in a government. As a reward, the vassals received a small piece of land. The nobles could also have their own vassals. As a result, numerous links were established and connected the nobles with the king.
The lands.
The lands were an essential factor in the feudal organization. They were practically the base of the feudalism system. In each land there was a castle where the noble lived. Some little villages where the peasants who depend on the noble life too, and also farmlands and kind of animal farms where the peasants worked day and night.
The lands were divided in the reserve and the masses. The reserves were a part of the lands that the king controlled directly. Even though the peasants worked and they produced all the food, in the reserves was all the king's property, and the peasants only could pick approximately between the 5% or 10% of the cultivation, and sometimes less than the 5%.
The messes were a kind of lands for the peasants, because it was a little zone where the peasants could produce their own food. As an exchange, they had to return it with money, food, and products, or, above all, personal services like being the high-class people's servants for an amount of time. These people was basically the king and the nobles. They also had to pay if they used the mill, the oven, or the press, because it was the king's property. In addition, there were some forests in the land which were also the king's property, and he decided when the peasants could go to hunt or look for firewood. But this time with any reward, because it was a punishment act from the king if the peasant wasn't working as well as he could.
And we finally conclude this tutorial, where we have learned from the top to the bottom of the feudal organization, how was socially and economically organized, what did the king, the noble, the clergy, and the peasants could do, and to close, the lands.
This has been the feudal organization in 5 minutes.
Hope you enjoy it and learn a lot.